Hey all, today we are talking about vulnerability in romantic relationships. I'm going to use Madison and I as an example because it's the only one I've got. Um,
Great.
okay, so what does vulnerability feel like in a romantic relationship? Why is it important and what does it feel like? Um, I guess I'll talk about my experiences first. Um, I was one to never be vulnerable before in romantic relationships. A lot of that stems from my feeling of, I think what I was brought up with was a feeling of worthlessness, but also inherently the people that I was with, I didn't believe deserved my vulnerability. And therefore, there was no real capacity for um, a really, to be in love with somebody because personally, I believe that you can't be in love with somebody unless you're vulnerable to being hurt, for example, vulnerable to allowing somebody in, right? Um, why I guess this is kind of comes back to why it's important, to really be able to be in love with somebody. And that's just not love somebody, but to be in love with somebody, because those two things are obviously very different. I love my friends. And of course, that requires a certain degree of vulnerability, but a very different degree of vulnerability in a romantic relationship. Friends come and go, right? Even if you lose your best friend, as horrible as it is, it's difficult to compare that to losing like the love of your life. And I think that's maybe the key difference, to be in love with somebody is requires a very, very large degree different of how vulnerable you are and what kind of vulnerabilities you give up. So when I met this girl over here, I call her this girl, she makes her crazy. Um,
Yeah.
it was the first time in my life that I wanted to be vulnerable and also um, needed to risk that vulnerability because I was madly in love with her,
Wow.
probably from the outset. And that need for me to become more vulnerable with her was because I wanted to fall more and more in love with her. We actually joke all the time that we get to a different level or a different, video game level almost of our relationship because we leveled up today because it's like this feeling of like I got more vulnerable with you. I feel closer to you because that's what vulnerability is, right? It's that feeling of the desire for that intimate knowledge of one another, and giving somebody something that you can actually be hurt by, right? Um, if you can't be hurt by your partner, then you have no vulnerability. And that's what I noticed in previous relationships. If the relationship ended by my hand or by another, I'd be like, whatever, see you later. And like literally 2 seconds later, be like, done with, because it didn't matter to me. Whereas now the difference is incomparable. I can't even imagine for a second that because so much vulnerability I've given to this beautiful person that actually takes care of that vulnerability and that she's proven over and over and over again how careful she is with that vulnerability. And each time I give her some of it and she responds by taking care of it and, nurturing it and loving it and all of those things, it just makes me realize how much more I want to give. And that's when we get that level up look that we give each other. So, what does it feel like to be vulnerable? Um, it's terrifying. I'll tell you that for sure. She always has this joke. It's like, I'll tell you that for free. Very much, I'll tell you that one for free. Feeling vulnerable is a terrifying experience, especially in romantic relationships. the desire to want to come closer to somebody, knowing that the risks of, if things go wrong, that I will be hurt, and I might be hurt in ways that I've never been hurt before. Um, and I am most definitely in that place, and that's a place that I have never ever been before. Never even been partially vulnerable, and now I've got this depth of vulnerability that I know that there's no coming back. There's no way that I could recover from the level of vulnerability that I've given of myself. And knowing that the person I'm with takes care of that and loves that. And of course, in turn, I do the same for her, I hope. You can jump in now, because you can start saying your stuff.
Okay. Well, you didn't stop
I'm
talking.
gonna just listen now.
My experience is exactly the same. I was always the person that would love someone less, and I think slightly on purpose, but slightly subconscious. And I didn't really look at it in terms of vulnerability at the time. I was just like, it's just not for me. Like, I just don't feel that way about people, and I just thought that that was how it was for me. And I accepted it. And so I lived my life like that. And then it would also show in forms of like always having to be the strong person. I think for me, it was like never showing weakness. And not just necessarily in romantic relationships, but in life in general. I had a really hard time being vulnerable in any part of life because I, as like a 20-year-old girl, perceived, being weak as, or being vulnerable as weak, right? And that was something that I was afraid to do because I had so much pride in my strength and in my abilities and in my smarts and in my looks, that if I opened up to someone or to the world about, the things that weren't perfect, I wouldn't have value anymore. And so somehow I've been able to tell Victoria these things. I'm not sure how. And yeah, be vulnerable with her. It started at the beginning of the relationship where if I had something that made me, that I had to say and I was like nervous about saying it, I would text it to her, even if we were in the same room, because I couldn't say it. But that was how it started for me. And it actually was a really good little tool that I used. I would write it up and I would send it and I'd be like, I have something to say, but I'm going to text it to you. And then it slowly became less text and more conversations. Yeah. And now it's actually quite easy, surprisingly. Although, yes, it is terrifying to feel like you have something to lose. I think that's what it is. Like, or you could be hurt. That's the scary part, right? But there is also comfort in being able to share all the parts of yourself with the person that you want to share them with.
We had this joke yesterday. I said to her, "I'm only weak for you."
Yeah.
And obviously it was the saying that like my vulnerability lies with you. All of my weak spots, but she also knows how to take care of all of those spots. And that strengthens me and that makes me fall more in love, I think, every day. And, vulnerability is one of those things, like it's, I think everybody knows inherently that, there's a good thing in that, it's a good thing to be able to be vulnerable, to not have to pretend to be strong all the time, because as we all know, we aren't, right? We're not strong. Mm-hmm. And it goes back to this idea that men are taught, at least socially, societally, that showing their emotions is a sign of weakness. And we know for a fact that that's insane. That's like closing off part of the human condition. And not showing your emotions doesn't mean you're not showing your emotions. It just means that those emotions will come out in more destructive ways. You don't show sadness, it's still going to come out. It's just not going to come out as sadness. It's going to come out as something else. It's going to come out as anger. Yeah. It's going to come out as a whole resentment. It's going to come out. It's not that it's not going to come out. You feel the emotion. It's going to happen to your body, or you'll get sick. You see all these things where people bottle up themselves, and they end up having hypertension, or they end up having all of these problems. And that, so much of that is because men are taught not to have vulnerability. And the strength of being able to be open and be vulnerable, in life, just in general, but and in friendships, of course. But that one type of vulnerability that you have with a romantic partner, that's the golden nugget kind of thing, like that's the thing that above all else feels like you've been seen.
Mm-hmm.
I spent my entire life seeing other people and always wondered when the day was that someone was going to see me. And that's what I got. And that only comes when you actually show yourself to another person.
That's cute.
So, with that being said, we love you guys. We hope that you can take any bit of the stuff that we share and apply it to your own life, or however you see fit. But we do this to really put the positive energy into this world, because Lord knows
needs it.
Maybe not Lord knows, but we know, everyone knows that we are desperately in need of that at this time in the world. This chaos that's erupting everywhere. So, with love.